There is a country where you can drive for a full day and pass no one. No town, no fence, no wire. Only grass, moving the way water moves, all the way to the edge of the sky. It is the size of Western Europe, and almost no one lives here. Mongolia holds around 3.5 million people, spread across a land of roughly 600,000 square miles. That works out to about 2 people for every square kilometre. Nowhere else on Earth, among the world's sovereign nations, is the human presence so thin. Half of those people live in a single city, which means the rest of the country, an expanse larger than most nations will ever be, is close to empty. And yet, 800 years ago, this same grass ruled most of the known world. Not a piece of it, not a corner. From these open plains came the largest continuous land empire in human history. It stretched from the Sea of Japan in the east to the gates of Europe in the west. At its height, it covered some 9 million square miles, from the Pacific to the Danube, from Siberia down toward the Persian Gulf. It was twice the size of the Roman Empire at its greatest reach. One empire, one family. Born on grass that today holds almost no one. Both things are true at the same time. This is the emptiest country on Earth, and it once ruled nearly all of it. The land has not changed. The grass is the same grass. The wind is the same wind. What happened here, and where did all of it go? To understand Mongolia, you have to stop reading the emptiness as absence, because the emptiness is the engine. The open ground that looks like nothing is the exact terrain that bred the horse cultures that once crossed a continent. What looks like a country where nothing ever happened is in truth one of the few places on Earth where almost everything did. This is Mongolia. Almost everything about this country is set to an extreme. It is one of the highest nations in the world by average elevation, a raised plateau tilted up toward the sky. It is deeply landlocked, among the most landlocked places on Earth, the nearest ocean more than 1,000 miles away in every direction. It receives around 260 days of sunshine a year, which is why Mongolians call their home the land of the eternal blue sky. And it holds some of the widest temperature swings of any inhabited place on the planet, from summer afternoons above 30 degrees to winter nights that fall below -40. To live here at all is to accept extremes as ordinary. Begin with the grass, because everything begins with the grass. The Mongolian steppe is one of the last great temperate grasslands left intact on the planet. Grasslands like this once ringed the northern world. Almost all of them have been ploughed, fenced, or built over. This one has not. It rolls for hundreds of miles without interruption, a sea of grass under a sky the Mongolians call eternal blue. For most of the year, the color is not green. It is gold, then bronze, then the pale straw of a land that has learned to survive on very little water. Rain here is rare. Winter is long and brutal. Temperatures swing more than 70 degrees between the seasons, from summer heat to a cold that can freeze a river solid. Trees cannot hold on across most of it, but grass can. Grass bends, dies back, and returns. And grass feeds animals. This is why the horse matters here more than almost anywhere else on Earth. On open grassland that stretches past the horizon, a people on foot can travel only so far. A people on horseback can travel as far as they want. In Mongolia, children learn to ride before some of them can walk properly. There is an old saying that a Mongol without a horse is like a bird without wings. The horse is woven so deeply into this land that the old Imperial post road still echoes across it. Every summer, riders from around the world gather for the Mongol Derby, a race of around 1,000 kilometers across open steppe, changing to a fresh, half-wild horse every 40 kilometers or so, following the route of the messenger relay that once carried the will of the Khan across a continent. It is called the longest and hardest horse race on the planet. It is also, in truth, just an ordinary day's work turned into a sport, on ground where a rider and a string of horses have always been the only real way to cross the distance. The math of the steppe is simple and unforgiving. There is not enough water in any one place to stay, so you move. You follow the grass and the seasons, packing your home onto animals and setting it down again 100 miles away. The home is called a gur, a round felt tent held up by a lattice of wood and a central ring, warm in a killing winter and cool in summer, and able to be taken down and rebuilt in under an hour. The door of a gur always faces south. The north wall opposite the door is the place of honor. This is where a family keeps its images of the Buddha and its photographs. Step inside, and a bowl of fermented mare's milk will be handed to you almost before you sit. To refuse hospitality on the steppe is close to unthinkable, because out here, a stranger turned away could be a stranger who does not survive the night. Even now, after everything, somewhere between a quarter and a third of all Mongolians still live this way, semi-nomadic, moving with their herds. It is not a costume for tourists, it is a working answer to a hard land, refined over thousands of years. A herding family measures its wealth in animals, and in Mongolia, those animals have a name all their own: the 5 snouts. Horses, cattle, camels, sheep, and goats, with the yak taking the place of cattle in the high country. Each one gives something the others cannot: milk, meat, wool, hides, transport, and dung for fuel where no wood grows. A family reads its herd the way a banker reads an account, and 1,000 head is a fortune. The clothing is built for the same life. The deal, a long belted robe worn by men and women alike, has changed remarkably little since the days of the Empire, because it already solved every problem the steppe poses. It wraps warm against the cold. It loosens in the heat. The wide sash braces the back through long hours in the saddle. A garment designed 1,000 years ago is still, for this life, close to perfect. And the year has its anchors. In the depth of winter comes Tsagan Sa, the white moon, the lunar new year, when families cross frozen distances to gather. Tables are stacked with steamed mutton dumplings called booze, made by the 100. Elders are greeted first, with both hands. It is a festival of survival as much as celebration, a marking of the plain fact that the family has come through another winter alive. And on this grass lives a creature that tells you what the steppe was before people ever fenced anything. The Taki, the Przewalski's horse. It is the only truly wild horse left on Earth. Not a Mustang, which is a domestic horse gone feral. A separate animal, never broken, never ridden, never tamed. Stockier than a domestic horse, with a stiff, dark mane that stands upright like a brush. By the 1960s, it was gone. Hunted, crowded out, its last wild individuals vanished from the steppe. The only Taki left alive were in zoos, a few dozen animals descended from a tiny founding group. And then, beginning in 1992, they came home. Descendants of those zoo horses were released back onto the grasslands at a place called Hustai, a day's drive from the capital. They were taught nothing. They simply remembered. Today, several hundred wild Taki again move across Mongolian hills, the only wild horses on the planet, standing on the exact ground where the horse and the human first changed each other's history. Down among the grass stems, a different life is unfolding, one most travelers never notice. A darkling beetle, black and armored, climbs a stalk in the cold hour before dawn. On the steppe and in the desert beyond, water almost never falls as rain. But at night, fog rolls low across the ground. The beetle tilts its body into the mist, and droplets bead on its back and run down toward its mouth. It drinks the air. In a land with almost no water, it has learned to harvest the sky. Above it, the grass hums with grasshoppers in summer, and in the distance, something is moving. Mongolian gazelle, tens of thousands of them in one of the last great land migrations left in Asia. They pour across the eastern steppe in herds so large that from a rise, they look like a shadow crossing the grass. There are no fences to stop them, no cities in their path. They move the way animals moved across the northern world before we changed it. This is what the emptiness protects: space enough for a migration to still exist. Follow the grass south and it thins. The gold fades to grey, then to bare stone and sand. The steppe becomes the Gobi. The word Gobi means roughly waterless place, and most people picture it wrong. They imagine an ocean of dunes. In truth, the Gobi is mostly gravel plain and rock, a cold desert, high and hard, where winter nights fall far below freezing. Only a small part of it is sand at all. But where there is sand, there is a great deal of it. The Kongorin Els, the singing dunes, rise as high as 300 meters and run for more than 100 miles. When the wind pushes the sand down their steep faces, the whole dune resonates. It produces a deep, low hum you can feel in your chest, a sound the old herders explained as the voice of the desert itself. And in the middle of this waterless place, there is ice. At Ulaanbaatar, a narrow gorge cuts into the mountains of the South Gobi. The walls rise close and steep, and the sun never reaches the floor. Deep inside, a sheet of ice survives through the summer, in a desert, meters thick, refusing to melt while the plains around it bake. A glacier in miniature, hidden in the last place you would look for one. The gorge takes its name from a bird, the yol, the bearded vulture, a bone-eating giant with a wingspan wider than a person is tall, riding the updrafts above the ice on wings that barely need to beat. The Gobi keeps other secrets, older than any of this. At a place the Mongolians call Bayanzag, Red sandstone cliffs glow like coals at sunset. They are around 70 million years old, and they are one of the richest graveyards of dinosaurs anywhere on Earth. In 1922, an American explorer named Roy Chapman Andrews led an expedition here, hauling supplies across trackless desert by camel. He had come looking for the origins of humankind. He did not find that. He found something else. His team uncovered the first nest of fossilized dinosaur eggs ever confirmed by science. Not one egg, a clutch of them, laid in the sand and turned to stone across 70 million years, exactly where the animal had left them. Andrews, with his wide hat and his taste for danger, would become one of the templates for a certain fictional adventurer the whole world later recognized. But the cliffs did not need the legend. Even today, after a century of expeditions, the desert keeps giving up bones. Wind strips the sand back, and another skeleton surfaces, waiting 70 million years to be seen. This is the strange gift of the emptiness. Nothing has been built over, nothing has been paved. The deep past lies close to the surface, undisturbed, because so few people have ever lived here to disturb it. And the desert is not dead. Far from it. Out on the gravel plains walks a creature that split from every other camel on Earth around 700,000 years ago. The wild Bactrian camel. 2 humps, a shaggy coat, and the ability to drink water so salty that no other large mammal could survive it. There are perhaps 600 of them left in the Mongolian Gobi. They are among the rarest large mammals in the world, and they endure in one of the harshest places any large mammal has ever tried to live. Somewhere in these same mountains moves a bear almost no one has ever seen. The Gobi bear. The Mongolians call it Mazalai. It is the only bear on Earth adapted to live in a true desert, sand-colored, smaller than its northern cousins. And there are only a few dozen of them left alive. A whole species hanging by a thread in a country most of the world thinks of as empty. Out on the open gravel, other survivors move in numbers. The Kulan, the Asiatic wild ass, gathers in the Gobi in some of the largest wild populations left anywhere on Earth, herds of them trotting across the plain at a pace that can outlast almost any pursuer. Once the Saiga antelope roamed here too in great numbers, a strange creature with a bulbous, downturned snout, built to filter dust and warm the freezing air it breathes, though hunting and hard winters have pushed it to the margins. And rooted in the dry ground stands the Saxal, a low, gnarled desert tree that looks half dead even when it is thriving. Its wood is dense and slow to grow, its roots reaching deep for water that is barely there. Whole belts of it hold the desert soil in place. Cut it down, and the sand begins to walk. In a land this dry, a twisted little tree is both a miracle and a wall, the difference between a living desert and a dead one. And higher still, in the far west, on ground that touches the clouds, lives the ghost of the mountains. The snow leopard. Pale, spotted, silent, it hunts the high ridges of the Altai, and Mongolia is one of the last true strongholds it has left. Perhaps 1,000 of them move through these peaks. Most people who spend their lives in these mountains will never see one. They see the tracks in fresh snow, and then nothing. The cat is already gone. The Altai is Mongolia's wildest frontier, a rampart of glaciers and rock where the borders of Mongolia, Russia, and China meet. And here, the people are not Mongol at all. They are Kazakh, the largest minority in the country, and they carry a tradition older than almost any nation on the map. Eagle hunting. In the dead of the western winter, a hunter rides out across frozen slopes with a golden eagle on his arm. The bird is not a pet, it is a partner, usually a female, larger and fiercer than the male, trained over years to launch from the fist and take foxes and hares across open mountain terrain. The bond is passed from father to child, and the secrets of the training are held close. On the cliffs above them are carvings, petroglyphs scratched into the rock in the Bronze Age, showing hunters and animals. The people beneath them are still doing, in the same valleys, almost exactly what the carvings show. Persistence in Mongolia is not a slogan. It is a hunter on a frozen ridge, doing what his ancestors did 3,000 years ago, because it still works. North of the deserts and the western peaks, the land changes again. The grass gives way to forest. Here lies Lake Kovsgol, the Blue Pearl, one of the largest and oldest freshwater lakes in Asia, holding a vast share of the country's fresh water in a single body so clear you can see far down into it. Around it stands the taiga, the great northern forest, the southern edge of the belt of pine and larch that circles the top of the world. And in that forest live the Tsatan, the reindeer people, a tiny community, a few hundred souls, who follow domesticated reindeer through the taiga, much as their ancestors have for centuries. They are one of the smallest surviving reindeer herding cultures on Earth, and they live in a Mongolia most Mongolians themselves rarely see, a green and forested country utterly unlike the deserts of the south. This is the thing the emptiness hides. Mongolia is not one landscape, it is many. Glaciers in the west, deep desert in the south, forest and lakes in the north, and in between, the endless grass, all held inside one nearly empty country. And still, there is more the emptiness holds. In the Orkhon Valley, a single waterfall drops over a cliff of black rock laid down by volcanoes 20,000 years ago. Scattered across the steppe stand the ruins of monasteries like Ongi, once home to 1,000 monks, now bare walls open to the wind. In the north sit the country's few other cities, Darkhan and Erdenet, built around mining and industry in the Soviet years. A traveler could spend a lifetime here and still leave whole provinces unseen. There is simply that much space and that few people to fill it. But if you want to understand where all the people went, you go back to the one place that is not empty at all. Ulaanbaatar, the capital. Its name means Red Hero. Nearly half of the entire nation now lives in this single valley city. It is one of the coldest capital cities on the planet. In the depths of winter, it drops far below freezing for weeks on end, and the city sits in a bowl ringed by mountains which traps the air. Around the old center, the Gur districts have spread across the hills, tens of thousands of families who left the steppe and pitched their felt tents on the edge of the city. To survive the winter, each household burns coal in a small stove, several tons of it across the season. The smoke has nowhere to go. It pools in the valley under a lid of cold air, and for months, Ulaanbaatar becomes one of the most polluted cities in the world. Parents keep children indoors. The smog is thick enough to taste. And behind that smoke is a quieter tragedy. Many of these families did not choose the city, they were driven to it. Mongolia is warming at close to 3 times the global average, and on the steppe, that warming has a name: the Dzud. It is a compound disaster, a summer drought that leaves the animals thin, followed by a winter so severe that the ground freezes over the grass and the herds cannot reach it. In a bad Zud, millions of animals starve or freeze in a single season. A family that owned 500 head of livestock in autumn can own nothing by spring. For a nomad, the herd is not just wealth, it is the whole way of life. And when it dies, there is often nowhere left to go but the city. The Gur districts of Ulaanbaatar are, in part, a monument to the winters the steppe could no longer survive. The emptiness of the countryside and the crowding of the capital are the same story, told from two ends. But Ulaanbaatar is not only smoke and hardship. It is also where modern Mongolia was made. For most of the 20th century, this was a communist country, the second nation in the world after the Soviet Union to turn communist in 1921. For nearly 70 years, Mongolia lived in the shadow of Moscow. Religion was crushed. The old vertical script was set aside for a Russian alphabet. And the name of Genghis Khan himself became dangerous to celebrate because the Soviet authorities saw the memory of the empire as a threat to their control. Then, in 1990, as the Soviet world came apart, Mongolians filled the central square of the capital in the freezing cold and demanded democracy. The change came peacefully. Not a shot was fired. A country the world remembered only for conquest ended its dictatorship without bloodshed and became a democracy wedged between two of the largest authoritarian states on Earth. At the heart of the city lies Ulaanbaatar Square, named for the revolutionary hero of 1921, and looking out across it now sits a vast statue of Genghis Khan, unthinkable a generation ago, restored to the center of the nation. And beneath the empty land lies another modern story: wealth. Mongolia sits on enormous deposits of copper, coal, and gold. In the South Gobi, one of the largest copper and gold mines on the planet, Oyu Tolgoi, cuts into ground where wild camels still walk. The emptiest country on Earth turns out to be one of the richest in what lies underground. And that wealth flows overwhelmingly south across a single border, to China, the buyer for nearly everything Mongolia pulls out of the earth. It is the country's oldest problem in a new shape. Landlocked between Russia and China, two giants who once feared its armies and now hold its economy in their hands, Mongolia survives the way it always has, by looking further out. By courting distant friends, it calls its third neighbors. By refusing, even now, to be pinned in place. This is modern Mongolia, caught between the horse and the city, between the eternal blue sky and the winter smog. But to understand why any of it carries the weight it does, you have to go back to the grass, and to a boy born on it with almost nothing. Around the year 1162, on the banks of a river in the north, a boy is born into a minor clan. His name is Temujin. His childhood is a catalogue of disasters. His father, a chieftain, is poisoned by a rival tribe while Temujin is still a child. With the father dead, the clan abandons the family, leaving a widow and her children to survive alone on the open steppe, which is nearly a death sentence. They live on roots and fish and whatever they can find. Temujin is captured by a rival clan and held prisoner, forced to wear a wooden collar around his neck. He escapes. By every expectation of his world, this boy should have vanished into the grass without a trace, one more casualty of the steppe. Instead, he does something no one had managed before. He unites the tribes. The Mongols were not one people. They were a scatter of rival clans, feuding endlessly over pasture, animals, and revenge. Temujin, through alliance, war, and a ruthless political brilliance, breaks the old tribal order apart and rebuilds it into something new. He rewards loyalty over birth. He promotes men of low origin who prove themselves and destroys those who betray him. Slowly, the feuding clans of the grass become one. It does not happen cleanly. In his climb, Temujin leans on a powerful patron, Togrul, the Khan of a dominant tribe, and on a childhood friend named Jamuka, a man to whom he had once sworn brotherhood as a boy. One by one, these bonds break. Patron and friend become rivals and then enemies. The steppe in these years is a shifting map of alliances made and betrayed. Temujin outlasts them all, not only by winning battles, but by changing the rules of the game beneath everyone's feet, binding men to him through loyalty and reward rather than blood and birth. In the year 1206, on the banks of a river, an assembly of the steppe peoples gathers. They proclaim him ruler of all the Mongols, and they give him a new title, Genghis Khan, universal ruler. He is around 44 years old. He has united a nation of perhaps 1 million people scattered across the grasslands. By the standards of the great settled empires to the south, it is nothing. A confederation of herders with no cities, no writing of their own yet, no walls. Within a single lifetime, they will terrify the world. The reason is the steppe itself. Genghis Khan took the very things that made Mongolian life hard: the constant movement, the endurance, the mastery of the horse, and turned them into the most mobile army the world had ever seen. His warriors could live in the saddle for days, drinking mare's milk, even opening a vein in their horse to drink a little blood rather than stop. They could shoot a bow accurately at a full gallop, firing backward over the horse's tail as they pretended to retreat. He organized the whole society on a decimal system, units of 10, of 100, of 1,000, cutting across the old tribal lines so that no man's first loyalty was to his clan anymore. It was to the Khan. They had one glaring weakness, and they fixed it by taking genius wherever they found it. A people of the open grass knew nothing of storming walled cities, so the Mongols simply absorbed the knowledge of everyone they conquered. Chinese and Persian engineers were brought into Mongol service, building siege towers, catapults, and later gunpowder weapons that could break the greatest fortifications in Asia. An army born in the saddle learned within a single generation to crack open cities that had stood behind their walls for 1,000 years. Whatever the Mongols lacked, they took from the conquered and turned it back upon the world. He gave the empire a written code of law, the Yasa. He guaranteed, to a degree remarkable for the age, freedom of religion across his domains. And he built something that sounds almost modern, a relay system called the Yam. Stations set at intervals across the whole empire, stocked with fresh horses and riders. A message could travel across thousands of miles of Asia at a speed no one had matched before. At its height, the network ran on tens of thousands of horses and hundreds of stations. An empire held together not by walls, but by speed. And then the conquest began, and the world learned what the grass had produced. Some of it began almost by accident. Genghis Khan had wanted trade, not war, with the powerful empire of Khwarezm in the lands of Persia and Central Asia. He sent a caravan of merchants. The governor of a border city called Otrar seized them and had them killed as spies. Genghis sent envoys to demand justice. They were killed too, one of them sent back with his head shaved in insult. The response reshaped a civilization. The Mongols fell on Khwarezm and took it apart. Great cities of the Islamic world, centers of learning that had stood for centuries, were emptied and burned. The message was deliberate. Resist, and you would not simply be defeated. You would be erased, and the next city would hear of it before the horsemen ever arrived. Leading many of these campaigns was a general who had begun life as the son of a blacksmith, Subutai. Rising purely on ability, exactly as the new order allowed, he became the most formidable strategist of the age, directing armies across thousands of miles, coordinating forces that swept from China to the plains of Hungary. Some historians count him among the greatest military commanders who ever lived. Almost no one outside these campaigns has ever heard his name. The Mongol Wars were among the most destructive in all of human history. When a city surrendered, it was often spared and taxed. When a city resisted, the Mongols made an example of it that would carry to the next city before their army did. Populations were slaughtered. Whole cities were erased. The historians who wrote afterward reached for numbers that are almost impossible to hold. The death toll across the decades of conquest has been estimated by some in the tens of millions. It is genuinely both things at once. The Mongol Empire opened the roads of Asia, protected trade, carried ideas and technology from one end of the continent to the other. And it did so on a foundation of terror, on a scale of killing the world had not seen. To tell only the peace or only the slaughter is to tell a lie by omission. In the summer of 1227, Genghis Khan dies. By then, his empire already stretches from the Pacific coast toward the Caspian Sea. According to the tradition of his people, he is carried back toward the steppe and buried in secret near a sacred mountain called Burkhan Khaldun, the mountain that had sheltered him as a hunted young man. The soldiers who escort the body are said to have killed anyone they met on the road, so that no one could reveal the route. Then they rode horses back and forth across the grave until the grass grew over it and no trace remained.
800 years later,
it has never been found. The founder of the largest land empire in history lies somewhere under the grass of Mongolia, and no one alive knows where. His sons and grandsons did not stop. They carried the empire further than he ever saw. They took all of China. They swept into Persia and the Middle East, into Russia, into the edges of Eastern Europe. Kiev fell. Cities across the Muslim world fell. For a few decades, a single family ruled an unbroken belt of territory from the coast of the Pacific to the plains of Hungary. Under that rule came something historians call the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. For the first and only time, a person could travel the whole length of the Silk Road under a single authority. Goods, faiths, technologies, and plagues all moved along those roads. The world became connected in a way it had never been before. The consequences of that connection outlived the empire by centuries. Along the roads the Mongols secured, technologies crossed the world that would remake it. Gunpowder, papermaking, printing, the compass, ideas that had matured in the East moved west and helped bring the medieval world to an end. Paper money, which astonished the European travelers who saw it, circulated across Asia under Mongol rule. But the roads carried darkness too. Along those same trade routes, many historians believe, traveled the plague that became the Black Death, the sickness that would kill perhaps a third of Europe. The Mongols stitched the world together, and it has never fully come apart since. For better and for worse, the map we live on was drawn in part by horsemen from the empty grass. And at the center of it, on the grass of the Orkhon Valley, they built a capital, Karakorum. Founded around 1220 in the heartland of the steppe at a crossroads of the old trade routes, for a few extraordinary decades, this remote valley was one of the political centers of the world. Envoys came here from the courts of Europe, from Persia, from China, riding for months across the continent to reach a city in the middle of the grasslands. Craftsmen, scholars, and merchants from across the empire were brought to it. There is a famous account of a great silver tree built by a European goldsmith that stood at the heart of the palace and poured out drink from its branches. That account comes from a real traveler, a Franciscan friar named William of Rubruck, sent east by the King of France, who crossed the entire breadth of Asia and reached this valley in the middle of the 13th century. He found envoys from across the known world already there, and a fountain shaped like a silver tree that dispensed wine, mare's milk, and honey mead from the mouths of silver serpents. He had come from the courts of Europe, and even he was astonished. In the middle of the emptiest land on earth, the world had built a court. And then the center of gravity moved, and it never came back. Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, finished the conquest of China, and he made a decision that changed Mongolia forever. He moved the capital of the empire south to a city that would become Beijing. He came to rule as a Chinese emperor, founding a dynasty called the Yuan. The heart of the empire was no longer on the grass. It was in the great settled cities of the south, where the wealth and the people were. It was to Kublai Khan's court that a young Venetian named Marco Polo is said to have traveled, carrying home to Europe accounts so lavish that many of his own countrymen refused to believe them. Kublai raised a fabled summer capital in the grasslands north of Beijing, a place Europeans would later call Xanadu, its name passing into English as a byword for a pleasure palace of the imagination. The Mongols, who had begun in felt tents on the open steppe, now held courts that left travelers from the far side of the world grasping for words. Karakorum, out on the steppe, began to fade. It had been built to run an empire. When the empire's rulers left, there was less and less reason for it to exist, and the empire itself was already breaking. It had grown too vast for any one man to hold. It split into 4 great khanates, and the grandsons and great-grandsons of Genghis Khan turned on one another. In 1368, the Yuan dynasty fell, overthrown from within China. The Mongols were driven back out of the south, back onto the grass they had come from. The last emperor fled into the steppe and died there. The empire was over, and the steppe was, once again, just the steppe. Karakorum did not survive. Abandoned by the rulers who had moved south, it was eventually torn down. In the late 1500s, its stones were carried a short distance and used to build something else. A monastery. Erdin-Zu, the oldest surviving Buddhist monastery in Mongolia, ringed by a wall of 108 stupas, 108 being a sacred number in Buddhism. Stand there today, And this is the paradox of Mongolia made solid. The capital of the largest empire in history is gone. You cannot walk its streets because there are almost no streets left to walk. What remains was folded into the wall of a temple. The city that ruled the world became, in the end, a foundation for prayer. And even that prayer was nearly extinguished. In the 1930s, Mongolia was a satellite of the Soviet Union, and it carried out its own version of Stalin's terror. Buddhism, which had become the soul of the country, was targeted for destruction. Hundreds of monasteries across Mongolia were demolished. More than 10,000 monks were killed, and countless others were forced to renounce their vows. At Erdene Zoo, most of the temples were destroyed. At Ongi, a monastery that had housed 1,000 monks was leveled, its people killed or scattered. In a matter of years, an entire spiritual civilization was pulled down. Not everything was lost. In the capital, one great monastery, Ganden, was allowed to survive, kept as a kind of showpiece, and behind its walls, a thread of the old faith held on through the decades of repression. Far to the north stands Amarbayasgalant, one of the largest monasteries to come through the century, still standing. And when the communist era ended, the faith came back into the open. Ruined monasteries were rebuilt. Young men took vows again. The prayer the state had tried to erase resumed at the same altars, in the same valleys, where it had been silenced. It is the Mongolian pattern once more, knocked down and returning. The empire folded back into the grass and returned as a people still on horseback. The faith was pulled down and returned to its own ruins. Even the wild horse was driven to extinction and returned to the hills. This is a country that has learned, over and over, across centuries, how to come back from almost nothing. This is why so little of the old Mongolia stands above the ground. Not only because the empire folded back into the grass, but because in the last century, much of what was left was deliberately destroyed. The emptiness you see is not only the emptiness of a nomadic people who never built much to begin with. It is also the emptiness of loss. And here is where the whole story finally comes together. Mongolia is the emptiest country on Earth, and it once ruled most of it. Both statements are completely true, and they are not a contradiction at all. They are the same fact, seen from two directions. The empire was born from the emptiness. A settled people, tied to their cities and their fields, could never have produced it. It took a people with no fixed home, who lived their whole lives in the saddle, who could pack up a nation and move it across a continent to conquer a continent. The very thing that makes Mongolia look like nothing, the endless open grass with almost no one on it, is the exact thing that once made it the center of the world. And when the empire ended, the Mongols did not leave behind pyramids or a great wall of their own or a ruined city you can photograph. They left behind grass, because they had never really left the grass in the first place. They conquered the world, and then they went home, back to the gur and the horse and the herd, back to the way of living that had made them powerful to begin with. A civilization that built the largest empire in history and chose to leave almost no stones standing.
So what is left after all of it?
The horse is left. The wild taki run again on the hills at Hustai, brought back from the edge of nothing, the only wild horses on the planet, on the ground where the horse first changed the human story. The nomads are left. A quarter of the country still moves with the seasons, still hands a bowl of mare's milk to a stranger, still puts up a gur with the door facing south. Every summer, the country gathers for Naadam, the festival of the three games: wrestling, archery, and horse racing, the same three skills that once fed an empire, now run for their own sake on the open grass. The horse races are not run on a track. Child jockeys, some of them only 6 or 7 years old, ride bareback across the open steppe for distances of 20 and 30 kilometers, the way their ancestors learned to ride before they could properly walk. The empire is gone. The children on the grass are not. And above all of it is the sky. Long before Buddhism ever reached these plains, the Mongols worshipped Tengri, the eternal blue sky itself, the vault overhead that covered the whole world without edge or wall. Genghis Khan believed the sky had given him his mandate, that it was heaven's own will he should rule. It is a fitting faith for a people of the open steppe, who had no cathedrals and needed none, because the temple was always overhead, unbroken from one horizon to the other. To this day, it is the sky that Mongolians name their country for. The grave is left, somewhere under the earth, unfound. The sacred mountain is left, still holy, and the emptiness itself is left, protecting the migrations and the deep past the rest of the world has mostly paved over. Drive east from the capital into the granite country near Terelj, and you come upon something staggering. A statue of Genghis Khan on horseback, sheathed in gleaming steel, 40 meters high, gazing east across the steppe toward the place he was born. It is one of the largest equestrian statues on Earth. His face is now everywhere in Mongolia, on the banknotes, on the airport, on the beer and the vodka, the centerpiece of a nation that spent 70 years being ordered to forget him. The ruler who was buried so that no one could ever find him has become impossible to avoid. Genghis Khan is thought to have around 16 million living descendants today, carried down the centuries in the blood of the peoples spread across the old empire. The man is everywhere and nowhere, like his country. There is a kind of honesty in the way Mongolia holds its past. It does not preserve the empire in marble. It does not need to. The empire lives in a people who are still, after 800 years, doing more or less what they were doing when they conquered the world. Riding, herding, moving with the grass, waiting out the winter. Perhaps that is the real lesson of the emptiest country on earth, that greatness does not always leave ruins, that a people can hold the whole world in their hands for a moment and then quietly let it go and return to the land that made them and call that enough. The grass is still there, the eternal blue sky is still there, and the wind still moves across it the way water moves, all the way to the edge of the sky, over a country that once ruled the world and now belongs again only to itself. Thank you for traveling with us across Mongolia. If you found something here worth staying for, consider subscribing and stay a while. There is more world to see.